Challenge is a big aspect in video games. Whether you're going through a Kaizo platforming level, an arena full of demons, or a Soulsborne boss, there's always that intrinsic motivation in your brain that makes you want to conquer that challenge. Unless you're one of those inbred gaming journalists who can't so much as finish a tutorial to understand it. And the series that is one of the biggest benefactors to today's Soulsborne and platforming challenges is the legendary Konami franchise, Castlevania. In Japan, it is known as Akumajo Dracula, translated to Devil's Castle Dracula. In this video, I'll be going over the 6 versions of the original Castlevania, plus a little bonus at the end. I won't be going over the various re-releases and ports, just the many versions that share the same Japanese title, have similar templates, but offer different experiences. Let's whip out the vampire killer and slay some monsters! Castlevania was created by Hitoshi Akamatsu, who approached this game with the perspective of a film director, pretty much in a similar vein as Hideo Kojima when he made Metal Gear, another Konami franchise. Being a fan of classic horror, Akamatsu wanted to make a game that was inspired by the classic monsters lineup from Universal and Hammer with a new storyline to go with it. Which is why you see in both versions of the title screen that the top and bottom borders are made like a film reel. It's a simple start. You're Simon Belmont, a well-known vampire hunter of the Belmont clan who dedicate generations defeating Count Dracula whenever he's resurrected. Simon struts his manly ass to Dracula's castle, and it's time to begin the game. Along the way, he must go through all kinds of wicked forces in the castle with his signature whip, the Vampire Killer, along with an array of sub-weapons like holy water, which burns enemies, a cross, which is like a boomerang, axes that go in a huge arc when thrown, and my favorite, but barely works later on, the stopwatch that freezes everything for a short time, giving you an opening to attack frustrating enemies. Oh, and there's throwing knives, but they suck, especially when you unintentionally switch to them when you pick them up and the sub-weapon you like gets replaced. Why Simon couldn't carry more than one sub-weapon is beyond me. In order to keep using the sub-weapon, you have to pick up hearts that act as ammunition, which can be obtained by whipping candles. This is the first for video games to have something familiar that doesn't function as health. Of all things, why hearts as ammunition? Is it because they're lifesavers? Was that the intention? With every use of a sub-weapon, it costs hearts to use. You can also obtain a double shot to throw more than one of the same sub-weapon, and can upgrade it to the triple shot to make your journey less frustrating, assuming you have more than enough hearts to use them. As for health, don't worry. You can replenish your health by finding some meat in the concrete of the castle! They call it pot roast, but it looks like mutton to me. It's pretty funny that meat is kept preserved in the walls and in good condition to eat. Anyway, the levels consist of the main entrance, lower and upper sections, caverns, the dungeon, the clock tower, and finally, the top of the castle. You have a variety of annoying enemies to come across. You start off with easy peasy enemies to take down like zombies and bats. You just have to time your whip strikes. There are also Black Panthers that can be avoided by jumping over them, never to be seen or heard from again. The enemies that you have to watch out for are fishmen that jump out of the water without warning, knights that throw axes, hunchbacks that jump around like monkeys, bone pillars that spit fire, bone serpents which do much of the same, and everyone's most beloved enemy, the Medusa heads with their wave-like pattern. When you get to the end of the level, you face a boss, and when you defeat them, you pick up a red orb to fill your health, and off to the next level you go. Oh, we can't forget that you can pick up power-ups for the Vampire Killer, which can be upgraded to a chain whip, and finally a Morning Star, which has a longer range and a spiked metal ball. If I can give criticisms to this game, even with the era and the system it was released on, it's that the controls can be a little stiff. Especially when you're climbing up or down stairs, restricting any other means of movement for attacks, and you don't influence Simon's jumps in midair. There are also many times where I died via knockback from getting hit by an enemy and plummeting down to my doom. There can be times during a boss fight where it can take a while to do when you don't have the right sub-weapon and strategy to approach it. Yeah. As if getting to them wasn't difficult enough through trial and error, you also lose your upgrades in the process. Even when you do pick up something like a temporary invincibility potion or a crucifix to wipe every enemy off the screen, it does very little to keep you from dying in the later stages. Despite having lives, you do have unlimited continues to try again. As you can see by the footage I recorded, I played this without having any knowledge of certain strategies to defeat bosses that could easily be looked up by fan wikis nowadays. Thankfully, we have emulation and the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, which is what I played. You can save at any point in the game, and when you're about to mess up, you can just pause and load the save state back up again, which kinda defeats the purpose of unlimited continues now. And so we finally come to Dracula, who loves to teleport and shoots fireballs. His only weak point is his head, and knowing when and where he's gonna attack feels like a gamble. So I do my best to time his positioning and throw boomerang crosses at him. Maybe whip his face when I can. Then when his head flies across the world, we get oh my god, seriously, what on earth is that? It's such a derpy looking demon. We all know he's supposed to look like this, but did they ever look at this and think they gotta tweak it up a little bit? As you might have guessed, it's not over yet, for this is his second phase. His tremendous size makes you unable to dodge, especially when you're cornered. His form also makes him spread out his fireballs wider and farther. I know I got this! Yes! We see the castle crumble, and we get one of the most bizarre end credits ever seen in video games. If you're a classic horror fan, those names would be familiar to you, like Trance Fisher and Bram Stoker, being in reference to Terence Fisher of the Hammer horror films and Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. Those are the actual names that Hitoshi Akamatsu took as aliases when developing this game. And of course, you got Christopher B., Belo Lugosi, Boris Karloff's, Love Chaney Jr., Mick Shreks, and so on. And you get to see Simon's Japanese name, Simon Belmondo. It's a sweet piece of trivia for sure. I welcome it. Overall, the original Castlevania is a solid game that serves as the foundation of what can be done with the series. It can be finished at around an hour or two if you know what you're doing. And yes, that's how long it took me, even without the knowledge of strategies to finish it quicker. But of course, we would get to see Konami breathe new life to the original across many iterations. Another version of Castlevania was developed at the same time as the NES Famicom version and was released about a month later. It would get released on the MSX2 home computer. In case you haven't heard of it, it's a Japanese computer that Konami took advantage of at the time along with their console endeavors, especially with the debut of the Metal Gear series to go with it. It would also make its way to the European market where this version would be called Vampire Killer. I'm going to be skimming through this one due to the interest of time, but mainly due to it being an old home computer game meant to be played on a keyboard. I can't for the life of me find an elaborate, high-quality manual to help me play this game better and figure out the rest of the controls when going to sub-weapons and other functions besides moving, jumping, and the whip. Playing with the arrow keys and spacebar for platforming and combat? Ew. Now playing keyboard mouse controls for first-person shooters? I'm all over that. From what I can gather here though, Vampire Killer's design choice is similar to the NES version. The graphics are a bit more detailed for a computer game, and it has a more open-ended feel where you explore certain areas to grab keys to find a big key from a certain chest so you can explore further into the game. You can also try to purchase a sub-weapon from the shopkeep who you have to find, but ends up charging you a huge sum of hearts for it. Yeah. We not only get hearts treated as ammunition, it's also treated as currency. So you would have to grind in order to get it. Come on, with such limited rooms you can go to in this area, killing monsters to get the amount I need? No thank you. Plus, whenever Simon gets hit, especially on a higher level, his knockback looks like he's jumping on the moon. Probably some performance issues in the settings when recording footage. Anyway, if you were too quick to pick up on this design choice, yes. This is by technicality the first time Konami picked up on the idea of an open-ended Castlevania, the seed of the metroidvania genre, if you will. They would try this again on the NES with Castlevania II Simon's Quest, but it would be perfected years later by taking a note from Nintendo's own Super Metroid with Castlevania Symphony of the Night on PlayStation. That's all I can say about that. On to the next iteration! Konami also had a hand in the arcade scene. Before the likes of Contra and Gradius becoming well known on the NES, they first started off in the arcades. They would do Castlevania later after releasing the console version though. I can say this version is quite the oddity for sure. They recreated the cover art on the title screen, but with Dracula giving a pogger-looking face at the front view. Oh. The game starts like this. Simon Belmont has gotten hitched with his bride Serena, but Dracula swoops in out of a thunderstorm, grabs her, and now Simon must go save her. Now why on earth does that premise sound so familiar? Oh. Uh-oh. I don't like where this is going. This game is brutally unfair! Why do you lose half of your health from getting hit once by zombies or, God forbid, skeletons? And this is the beginning level, for crying out loud. Now look at this part where I'm trying to dodge bricks being thrown at me. Okay, let's be fair here. I'm not gonna give it too much crap because this is an arcade game. They're specifically designed to be difficult on purpose to steal your quarters so you can keep playing. But I'm playing this through the Arcade Classics Anniversary Collection. No money is involved here, besides paying the retail price for it at digital storefronts, so what it does now is waste my time. Screw this, I'm playing the Japanese European version of this game. At least this version is more forgiving since you take less damage from a single hit. Granted, it doesn't completely nullify all of the difficult aspects since it's still classic Castlevania, and it's designed to be a frustrating arcade game on top of that, but I still need to keep a shred of sanity intact and value my time here, you feel me? Alright, to highlight some things here, Haunted Castle is good looking for an arcade game since it's rocking more detail. It can be too colorful in some areas compared to other atmospheric settings, but then again, the graphics for the NES version had some color to them as well. We can't forget that Akamatsu approached the original Castlevania with a classic horror movie feel to it, so it would make sense here. Even then, it doesn't stop the game's sprites from looking weird sometimes, mainly from Simon himself. He looks like he's limping his way to the castle. Or maybe he just has diarrhea but is trying to hold it in until he gets to Dracula so he can dump it all over him. Whenever Simon gets hit, he looks like he's busting a move. The sound that goes with it is a strange screech, which doesn't go well with Simon since you hear him scream when you die. And is he trying to twerk on the level map screen? For gameplay, the controls feel more floaty whenever you make a stiff jump, and the movement speed sucks, especially when you're trying to dodge hazards. Most of them are unavoidable considering the sprite size, especially enemies like the Hunchbacks. The Vampire Killer can be upgraded from a whip to a Morning Star and turn into a sword as its final form. As powerful as it is, it's not implemented well with Simon in terms of how it's animated. There's no pot roast to restore your health. Instead, you are meant to use the continues you are given from spending quarters to extend your health bar. I don't mind using it, unless I died enough times to have my main weapon downgraded to the leather whip. You only get hearts from killing enemies now instead of whipping candles and torches for them. None can be found. Sometimes they can be hard to pick up because instead of being dropped to the ground like you would expect they do in the other versions, they have an animation that lets them float down at an arc, but when it misses solid ground and goes into a bottomless pit, you miss your chance of getting more ammo. The sub-weapons are more situational this time. They replaced holy water with bombs, which function much of the same, but it is effective with the likes of the Medusa. You have an ordinary boomerang, but it doesn't come back to you, so it's just a generic metal pipe. You have the cross, but in this version, it works pretty well against a line of enemies. When it comes to the stopwatch, it's awesome here since you pay less hearts to use it, and you can freeze everything, and I mean everything. Anyway, after all the hell the game puts you through, you cross the crumbling bridge and finally get to Dracula, who is pretty easy in both forms. With just enough time left and the power of the Blade of Vampire's Bane, you defeat Dracula, rescue your wife, and the castle crumbles, ending the game. That is when the game continues to do the arcade thing and throw you back at the beginning to do it all over again. Yeah, keep going to rack up the high score, which is meaningless nowadays. Yeah, no, I can say I beat it. But hey, at least the soundtrack is awesome, especially Bloody Tears Cross Your Heart and Can't Wait Until the Night. This version isn't really bad, it does what it was designed to do as an arcade game. But when you're playing this nowadays, even with how hard it is, you can beat it in less than half an hour. It's just there are far superior versions than this. Like the next game in the lineup! Aw yeah, now this is where it's at. Don't let the title of the game fool you. While it is called Super Castlevania 4 in the West, it's also known as Akomajo Dracula in Japan, meaning that this game is a remake of the original. Same setting, same characters and all. The Japanese version is what I played through the majority, with a more detailed HUD that fits with the setting compared to the generic video game HUD in the Western version. The title is even dripping blood in the opening. Aside from that, the Japanese version is exactly the same game. The 16-bit graphics and music set the mood perfectly. Elements like the fog adds into it. We also have a variety of locations to traverse. In the first half of the game, you are actually making the journey to the castle through abandoned ruins, caverns, and a swamp, a clever way to prepare you for the challenges that lie ahead. Once inside, you find out that the castle is nothing like what you went through. We'll get to that in a moment. Super Castlevania 4 has quality of life improvements that make this objectively the best version. Aside from moving into the 16-bit era, we have a more versatile Simon to control. You not only get a little mid-air control when jumping, your whip can strike in 8 directions. Any enemy that is above or below you, or when you go up or down the stairs, can be taken out with enough strikes. Even enemies that are too low to hit before can't escape the power of this thing. You can also dangle it around to deal with projectiles and airborne enemies when you hold the attack button and use the directional buttons. Grapple points can also be used to swing with the whip, and when you position it just right with the proper momentum, you can make it to faraway platforms. And since we're on the Super Nintendo, we have more buttons on the controller to use. Pressing the R button allows you to use whatever sub-weapon you have equipped. Combining that with how great the whip is, some bosses can come off pretty easy to take down, even levels with more than one. When you do beat a boss, sometimes you have a little bit of the level to go before moving on to the next stage. Still, if you think this is an easy game with these changes, you are dead wrong. You still get knocked back when getting hit for starters. You still have to know the placement of some enemies and projectiles, as well as calculate your jumps, including the segment with the swinging chandeliers, and the spinning room that can get a little disorienting. There's even death traps in the castle like sinking into gold in the treasure room, disappearing platforms with falling spikes, a spinning saw blade as you make a climb upon collapsing stairs, spiked ceilings to avoid by jumping on elevating platforms, and a 3-boss gauntlet before getting to Dracula. The first part is Slagra with his spear and beak attacks. Every time you strike him, he jumps up and goes down to where you are standing. You have to move quickly when you strike him. After you manage to beat him, taking down Gaibin with his flight and fireballs, and Death himself are nothing compared to that. Taking down Death is as easy as crouching down underneath this platform and holding the whip upward to stop his sickles. Hell, you don't even have to dangle it around here. That, and when he's on the ground, it's a good opportunity to strike him as well as avoid his big scythe, all while having an invisible force push Simon toward death. Now we come to the epic showdown with Dracula. Oh, before that, we can't forget about the invisible platform and stairs that gives you bonus hearts, a triple shot power-up, and full health. That is some good secret stuff right there. Spares me the trouble of grinding hearts from going up and down the stairs at the top of the castle in the original. This final fight is awesome. He adds more to his fireball attacks, like sprouting 3 projectiles from a big one, fire skulls, and putting a string of small fireballs together and have them fly around. When you whip at them, they actually drop mud in case you took a hit or two. Finally, when Dracula gets close to death, Simon's theme starts playing, signifying that you are close to victory. But Dracula is not done yet. He can use lightning pillars to strike you with. My strategy? Spam the hell out of the boomerang crosses and whip his head whenever I can! Much like what I did in the original NES version. You jump for the final red orb as a victory pose, or look like you're about to end a sitcom, and that's the end. What a fantastic game. 30 years since its release, it still holds up. Definitely one of the best on the Super Nintendo, and it's my second favorite in the overall series for sure. Wish I could end it right here, but there's still a few more I need to cover. Konami just couldn't leave good enough alone, I guess. Another version of Akomajo Dracula came out in 1993 and was only sold in Japan for another home computer, the Sharp X68000, but it would eventually be released on the PlayStation under the title Castlevania Chronicles in 2001. 4 years after the success that was Symphony of the Night. I would have hated to be one of those people that picked this game up for the aesthetic alone, since the cover art and designs were made by artist Ayami Kojima, who did the character illustrations for that game. Hey, check out Simon's design here. He looks like a real leather daddy. This one is like the NES version, but with newer aesthetics to flesh out set pieces. For gameplay, it's a strange hybrid of the original and the SNES remake, where it takes one step forward and many steps back. For one, you have fluid mid-air control from jumping, while the vampire killer can only whip straight down and downward diagonally when jumping. No other multi-directional whipping and dangling it around to deal with smaller BS enemies, but even the placements for the most basic enemies is terrible, and there's no other means to avoid their attacks, and you don't have any other means of movement to attack while on the stairs most of the time. Now, you can get by smoothly in the first couple stages if you know what to do, until you see that the game will screw you over throughout the whole adventure. This is what ruins this version for me, the difficulty. Yes, I've gone on about the difficulty before in the past iterations, but this one is to the point of overkill. Again, I'm excusing Haunted Castle since it was designed to be a hard arcade game for money's sake. This one is developed for a home computer and a game console. This version consists of overly long stages with very little to no health to find, and stages have moments where the devs have the opportunity to prank you with unexpected changes in level and enemy design. Fool you! All for what? For the sake of being different? Nothing wrong with that, but this comes off as frustrating. See Simon's death sprite? That is literally me face planting on the ground. I did not bother continuing. It's much like the NES Ghosts and Goblins with lives and infinite continues, which doesn't really make up for what you have to go through with the limited design choices like no health items. I think the reason why is so they can make use of the herb sub-weapon. Why would a healing item be a sub-weapon anyway and cost 10 hearts to use? Just give me meat! And I'm sorry, if there's not enough movement for Simon's whip like what he had in Super Castlevania 4, then this is not Simon Belmont. But hey, at least the soundtrack is good. If there's one thing I can always comment about is how polished the music is. Much of the same can be said about the arrange mode in Castlevania Chronicles. It's practically the same as the SharpX 68000 version, but you can change things up to make the journey less strenuous, like changing the difficulty and the amount of lives you start off with. You still have to put in the effort to endure some aspects like the level design and certain enemies, regardless of whether you tweaked the difficulty or not. There are graphical touch-ups to make it look a bit like Symphony of the Night like Fire, and Simon here is depicted from the cover art. The soundtrack is also completely different.
Uh-oh, party over here!
Anyway, after having to endure all of that crap that screwed me over, I made it to Dracula, grinded for hearts at the steps for the final battle, and I quit. Yeah, I've played and beaten just about enough versions to know what I'm getting myself into. I know I was so close to the end goal here, but I needed to stop before I burned myself out. I don't need to prove anything by beating this version. It's already given me enough trouble as it is. I've beaten the original, Haunted Castle, and Super Castlevania 4, so that's good enough for me. I'd rather move on to other games with greater challenges. But you know, I can't leave you lot hanging on such a sour note here. Let's look at a little bonus. This right here is a Doom ROM hack that plays like the original Castlevania called Simon's Destiny. This is an entirely new experience created by one Andrea Gori. As you might expect, it's Doom, but Castlevania. You can use the whip and sub-weapons in a 3D perspective. You whip at pots for money, whip candles for hearts, upgrade the whip, and you have Doom elements where you pick up color-coded keys to unlock doors and find hidden places to get better stuff. Enemy sprites are made to fit with this setting, including some taken from Symphony of the Night, like the Medusa head. Even the sound effects from that game are heard here. You also get an Easter egg cameo from everyone's favorite nerd.
That was some turkey.
Yeah, that's one real way to give two popular franchises some fresh life. Combine them together. I definitely wouldn't mind seeing an official 3D Castlevania from Konami in this style. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this trip through the many different versions of the original Castlevania. I wouldn't mind doing something like this again in the future. To be real, I'm more fond of the Metroidvania genre, not just with Castlevania, but other IPs as well. And yes, that includes the spiritual successor, Bloodstained. But I feel making this was necessary to remind people where it all came from back then and how many times it's been remade. We honor the past to make a better future, and that's what entertainment should be. I hope you look forward to more projects coming up, so I'll catch you lot later. Hey everyone. Sorry for my lack of reviews all year. I had some personal issues going on along with suffering from creative burnout. But this changes now. I'm gonna get started on a couple of video essays for a few of my favorite movies, as well as future content I have planned for 2023. I hope you look forward to it. So if you like this video, by all means, share it around and subscribe to the channel, follow me on my socials, and all that jazz. By the way, if you want to watch the uncut version of this video, head on over to my Rumble. I'll provide a link in the description. See you soon!